and welcome to the Amplifying Scientific Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sophia Onoyonya, founder and CEO of the Sophia Consulting Firm, a life science marketing and communications consultancy that was established in New York City with the goal of amplifying scientific innovation. The goal of this podcast is to showcase scientific innovation stemming from global life science companies prior to and following COVID-19 from the perspectives of founders, CEOs, and other senior executives who are working on the development of transformative, life-saving solutions for patients. My guest today is Mr. Walt Linscott, Chief Business Officer of Intec Pharma, a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company that is dually located in New York City and Israel, and is focused on developing drugs based on its proprietary accordion pill or AP platform technology. I had the pleasure of meeting Walt at the 2019 Ladenburg Thalmann Healthcare Conference in New York City, where he presented insights about Intec Pharma's development pipeline, which includes CBD treatments for various pain indications. Excitingly, in addition to holding a law degree from the University of Dayton in Ohio, Walt is trained at the University of Oxford, where he's currently working on his dissertation on DNA methylation epigenetic signatures as a biomarker for stratification of age-dependent populations. Walt, it is indeed serendipitous to feature you on the podcast since my doctoral dissertation was also on epigenetics, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today. So welcome to the show.
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. Thank you, Sophie. Appreciate that. Thank you for that intro.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. So my first question is probably the most important. I would love to know, what is your definition of scientific innovation?
Sure. Thank you for that. I look at science, or I think of scientific innovation not as an endpoint, but more as a continuum and a process. And I think we've all heard Edison's famous quote that I didn't invent something, I found 10,000 ways to do it differently,
right,
or get a different result. So for me, scientific innovation really is an iterative process where folks are excluding factually something that isn't really where you want to head. Let's think of pharmacokinetics, for example. We look at toxicity. Well, that's something we don't want to achieve, but we still have to test for it. So we have to exclude that as sort of as a point. So as you innovate, as you think about things scientifically, you're looking for these different factual points to come up with a new way, a better way perhaps, but at the very least a different way to do something. So I think sometimes we think of innovation as having this, end result, but you have clinical trials that don't always work. Is that a failure? No, you've excluded perhaps that pathway for somebody else to go down. So in some respects, that is part of innovation. So I try to encourage folks to think of, sort of the risk-taking element here, that you will find quote unquote failures along the way, but you need to experience those to exclude that and to teach and to innovate and to get to a better endpoint. Although investors might not be happy with a clinical trial failure, that is part of the process, and that's what we engage in every day. It's really part of your culture. So that's how I look at scientific innovation.
I like that. I think I really appreciate how you emphasize the risk component, because people don't understand that roughly 9 out of 10 experiments fail. So it does take a lot to innovate. So thank you for clarifying that. And
Sure.
My second question, I think looking at your background alone, it's pretty obvious that you're very well accomplished. But what is your most notable accomplishment pre your position today as a Chief Business Officer at Intec Pharma?
Thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't say initially marrying the most wonderful woman in the world almost 35 years ago. But
wow.
Yes, no. I think for me, the most notable, I think that from the most satisfying accomplishment for me is to help other folks advance and to move forward in their careers, to encourage, to help them become the best people that they can be. I've had very proud of a young lady that I had who was reporting, helped her move forward, encouraged, provided the right kind of environment, encouragement, let her kind of stand on her own 2 feet. And she today is an appellate court judge, has advanced forward and done very well. And other folks who have gone on to lead other companies, to create and innovate, to run regulatory groups. I'm certainly motivated by helping people achieve, and if they eclipse me, that's fantastic, because that means I've done my job. And I think you can take satisfaction in really seeing how you can help, expand the world, and it's, for betterment.
That's admirable. I like the balance really between sort of the professional side as well as the personal side, because I think it takes a careful balance of both to be truly successful. So thank you for sharing that. Now, my next question is just out of massive curiosity. You provide a top line overview of potential or ongoing work that may be related to immunotherapy and or anti-infectives that you may be working on. I think I alluded to that earlier in the introduction about some of the work that you're doing in epigenetics, but I would love to hear more.
Sure. So the company that I'm with right now, Intec, our focus is more on delivery, and we have some interesting approaches working on for peptide delivery and things of that nature. We don't traditionally work on anti-infectives today, although some of our delivery mechanisms, I think, would have some use for antivirals and things of that nature. My research and work at Oxford currently, I'm looking at DNA methylation and CpG site methylation in particular, as a biomarker, and really looking at it from the standpoint of a biological clock. There's been a lot of work and a body of work published with respect to so-called biological or epigenetic clocks. And when we look at the development of any therapeutic in a clinical trial setting, we think of stratification of our population, right? Our inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then how we focus on different segments of patients based on a variety of factors. And one of those is age. And, here we are in the 21st century with all of this fantastic science and technology and understanding of genetics and the importance of all of that and how that really influences everything within the human body. Yet we still look at chronological age as sort of this factor of stratification. So I'm looking at how we can try to apply the concept of biological clock into the sort of the mainframe of clinical trial work, and how we incorporate that as part of stratification of patients. I think it's a more appropriate mechanism than just defaulting to chronology, because it makes you look at the actual status of the patient. And, you also would collect evidence and information that I think we can build upon. And I'll touch on that on one of the later questions here, with respect to how I think that, plays an important role within the industry.
Yeah.
I haven't drawn any conclusions yet. Obviously, you go where the science takes you. But I look at it as a way to meld both the scientific aspect of my work and my, the regulatory legal part of my career and my experience. Because at the end of the day, those are, the regulatory frameworks are the gatekeepers of how we ever get any of these therapies to the public. And certainly that is a question that is ongoing today with COVID-19. There's some controversy, there's some trepidation, there's some concern about how all of these mechanisms are working as we struggle to rapidly advance. And I think if we had better understanding of how the biological age component really works, I think that would be an important component for clinical trial work. So that's really kind of the focus in a top line overview aspect.
And thank you for sharing that. It's two things I want to highlight. I don't think a lot of people know that epigenetics literally stands for above genetics. And I think that the work that you're doing showcases that. And you sort of alluded to COVID-19 just briefly enough for me to think that this might be a good time for me to ask you, how has COVID-19 changed the way you approach work internally at Intec Pharma, and just also as an individual? How has that changed it?
Sure. I mean, there are the obvious, the restrictions. We all kind of suffer under that. And that's really, if one thing I will say, it's somewhat unifying globally because most countries and most people are experiencing the same kind of status. So in many respects, it's kind of leveling the playing field in that regard. I mean, practically speaking, because we are a company with offices in New York, we have manufacturing in Germany, an R&D facility in Jerusalem. I actually live in Atlanta, Georgia. So, I'm used to, when we could travel, I spend a lot of time on Delta. But, so we work in a relatively virtual context. And then in that regard, you have to be dependent upon people to self-motivate. You have to have confidence in their ability to work independently, and that is a bit of a challenge sometimes. We all like to control things, I think, but you have to have confidence in your colleagues at a level that may not exist when you're in the same physical confine.
Right.
So from that respect, I don't see a lot of difference. We have experienced closures in Israel. There was very, very strict rules. I mean, the folks were not allowed to go more than 100 meters from their house, and they're actually tracked. They use cell phone tracking. I mean, it's a different context. They live in a very different, unfortunately, in many respects, they live in a different world, and they have different concerns and pressures that aren't necessarily inconsistent with what we had with respect to our shutdowns and our, confines and the feeling of people wanting to track us, which here in the US, I think is a little bit more challenging for people to cope with.
Right.
But, we've had to go to a even more virtual environment. We don't have the benefit of travel. It's much more challenging to interact personally. I mean, there's still, I place high value on actual personal interaction. I think I appreciate our ability to communicate directly, but this is very two-dimensional.
Yeah.
We don't have that, that ability to really be there and sort of understand and sort of touch people in a way that you can when you're one-on-one. So in that respect, I think we have, a little bit more challenge, but things are starting to quote unquote normalize a little bit. Folks are allowed to go back to work in Israel, and we're at 100% now in that facility. So I still can't travel there though. So.
Well, I think that hopefully in the next few weeks, few months, we'll be in a better position to travel. And if for me on a personal note, what this has showcased is just the importance of physical touch, being able to shake a person's hand and have a conversation. It's funny how we took that for granted almost. But, similarly, as I think about the pandemic, I'm also curious about how your corporate social responsibility efforts as a company might have changed just in response to COVID-19. Do you have any details that you might want to share?
I don't think we haven't changed the outreach of the fabric of corporate social responsibility within our organization is a sort of a continuum. It's not really dependent upon the existence of travel or pandemic, or it's not necessarily influenced by a pandemic. I mean, we may have more, I think, and there's a tendency for people to be more, have more outreach, to want to participate and appreciate more, particularly for those of us who work in the pharmaceutical biotech industry. I mean, we spend our lives professionally thinking of ways to treat and cure disease, so we can understand and empathize at a level. But I don't think it's had that significant an impact. Now, what will it do longer term? We may have some influence because of changes in the social dynamic. and I think you need to be open and aware and receptive to how you might influence and best work with some of those changes. There are a lot of segments of the population that are going to be extraordinarily harmed by all of this.
Right.
Those effects are going to be long lasting and long term. And at the very least, we need to be aware of that. And as we see opportunities to try to have some positive effect, I think it's important that we can do that. So, if anything, we have more opportunity perhaps to make a positive change.
Right. No, I thank you for sharing that. I think it makes absolute sense. And just thinking broadly, what are some key consideration factors that you believe will be integral for sustaining innovation in the life science industry?
Thank you. That brings me back to my earlier points here.
Yeah.
The industry itself, and I've been involved in it now for a little over 30 years. And as a lawyer in my early career, I appreciate patents and trade secrets and all of the things. I was very caught up and tied up with trying to keep things within the grip of the company so they could maintain their competitive advantage. And that's, that is an important component of all of this. But I think what is really fundamentally important is that we need to have a mechanism to really better share data. Clinical trial information is critical. And, through my experience at Oxford and spending a lot of time in the UK, I know in that part of the world, certainly there's an emphasis on open sharing clinical trial results. All of that information and data, I think, is important. I mean, I find it a bit frustrating in my research because I know there's information out there, but I can't get at it and I can't easily find it. Look, I think it enhances the innovation by keeping that bar high. Having that information available, having the data so that people can build on it, makes the world more competitive. And that's a good thing because it forces you to have to advance if you want to stay ahead. And I think naturally people like to try to stay ahead of things. So fundamentally, I think we need to have more openness and a better exchange of information, better repositories. We have fantastic communication tools, and now we're all used to using them. So there's no excuse.
Right. Again, I couldn't agree with you more. I think accessibility of data and transparency in terms of, information sharing is really the key. And we all are going to find a way to hopefully cooperate more because it's not about competing. It's about coming together to, come up with novel solutions for patients. And having said that, now I'm curious, is there any technology or company that you're currently excited about and why? And it's okay if it's your own company.
I of course have to. No, I'd have to give you the whole preface about forward-looking statements if I talk about our companies are publicly traded. But I think for me, I look at gene therapy as a field that I find very exciting. iPSC, in pluripotent stem cell work. Particularly in the allogeneic field where you are creating a broader spectrum, it has more efficiency. I think there's greater opportunity there. I'm lucky to be exposed in this industry and with, my research to some just incredibly brilliant people. I'm fascinated by the work that they do in this field. I mean, how we ever got to the state of understanding that we're at today is just, if you stop and try to digest that for a second, it's incredible. So, in that respect, that area of endeavor, I think is really exciting. I think we are on the cusp of some very exciting and really life-changing solutions here. And I think that, that is where the future is. And, it focuses more on personalized medicine, if you will. We're looking at, therapeutics used to look at the broad spectrum. We're happy if we had 30% efficiency in something. That meant a lot of people it didn't work for, but, but we're not, this sort of single mass. We are snowflakes in the
Right.
positive sense of that word, that we're unique. And what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. And I think, particularly in the area of genetics and gene therapy, intrinsically you're looking at that component, and that's building into the approach. Long way to go, a lot of struggles, I think, along the way, but when we can help one person at a time, I think the world will be better.
I share the same passion with you. I do have a very strong belief in this allogeneic off-the-shelf therapies, and I do think that could probably be the wave of the future. Now, let's talk a little bit more philosophically for the next few minutes as we wrap up.
Sure.
So how would your advice for a new biotech CEO be different today versus pre-COVID-19?
Again, I don't know that there would be a difference. I think I might have more emphasis. My perspective has always been that to be successful and to be a leader in any endeavor, you have to have you have to be flexible. You have to be prepared to adapt. COVID-19 is a terrible thing. It is a life-altering experience for all of us, but it's not unique. Unfortunately, the world deals us some pretty terrible things on occasion. Let's go back to 9/11, for example. If anybody, think about how that changed how you get on an airplane and how it changed culturally how we interact with people. There are things that have those sort of shockwave effects, and you have to be prepared to be flexible, to understand, and to empathize and be prepared. Understand how your folks are reacting to it. It's important to focus on the bottom line, but your bottom line only exists because you have people to catch it. And if you don't take good care of your folks and you're not aware, so self-awareness, flexibility, and be prepared to adapt. And don't be scared of adaptation. In its own right, that's a form of, you can innovate, to our first question, right? So you have an opportunity to innovate. So that would be my advice in this world going forward.
Very well said. So my final question for today, do you have any other commentary or thoughts, anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up today?
Well, I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. I certainly appreciate it. To my colleagues and to everybody out there who is fighting the fight with respect to COVID-19, I want to extend my personal thank you and gratitude for all that you're doing. I think it's, there are a lot of selfless people out there today that are working very hard. But I'm also confident that collectively, through the intelligence and hard work of all of these folks, that we will find a cure and an approach that will set us on the path forward of prosperity and happiness again. And, I hope that we can take this opportunity to make some further positive changes and learn from the experience in ways that you might not have had but for this. So out of some adversity, we should find some greatness as well.
Wonderful. Extremely well said once again. And Walt, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm definitely looking forward to staying in touch. So thank you again.